Today we are going to talk about lesson number 10, nervous system. We'll quickly go through with the syllabus and scope of syllabus. We'll talk about the structure of neuron, central, autonomous, peripheral nervous system. In brief, brain, spinal cord, reflex action, and how it is different from voluntary actions. We will also discuss the parts of neuron, the various parts of brain, that is cerebrum, cerebellum, medulla oblongata, thalamus, hypothalamus, pons, along with their function. We will also focus on the difference and the distribution between brain and spinal cord about white matter and grey matter, voluntary action, involuntary action, reflex arc, a brief idea about PNS and ANS, diagrammatic explanation of the pathway of reflexes from receptor to the effector. Now you all are aware about what is going around us and what is happening inside the body. So who keeps all of us informed about the happenings? That is the nervous system. So basically we will require nervous system as it creates the network of information about outside world through this sense organ. It also enables us to remember, think and reason out. It also controls and harmonize all voluntary as well as involuntary activities going in our body, right? But our nervous system, since it consists of brain, spinal cord, sense receptor and number of nerves, the brain and spinal cords are made up of neurons, that is called as unit of nervous system. Now you have to draw this diagram in your notebook, right? So you can pause this presentation, draw this diagram and come back to this discussion. Remember one thing, when you draw this diagram, there are few labels which are very important. You should sketch and label them properly, and those are dendrites, cell body, nucleus, axon, myelin sheath, node of Ranvier and axon terminal. These are the most important labels. Let's go in discussion. Neuron is made up of three important structures. First of all is cell body. It has a well-defined nucleus. It has all cell organelle except centrosome. That's why neuron do not divide, because if you remember from grade 9 lesson number 1 cell, centrosome initiates cell division. Second is axon. It is a long process, arises from cell body and continues into the number of branches. We call them as axon terminal. Sometime these axon has lateral branches, we call them as collateral, and sometime these axons do not have any branch, we called it as unbranched axon. Now the diagram which is in front of you on the screen has unbranched axon. The main function, student, of this axon is to carry the impulse from cell body to the brain or spinal cord. The size of this axon will vary from few millimeter to 1 meter, and it has a protective covering called as neurolemma, and inside this neurolemma what is present is called as myelin sheath. Okay, so basically neurolemma is one more protecting sheath present over the myelin sheath, and the gap present between two myelin sheath is called as nodes of Ranvier, right? The end part of this axon terminates into number of branches. We call them as axon terminals or axon endings. The ends of axon terminals slightly swollen, forming a bulb-like structure. It contains a chemical called as neurotransmitter. Okay, these neurotransmitters will be released during the passing of impulse from one neuron to another neuron. And these two neurons are connected by means of a synaptic cleft. What is synaptic cleft and what is synapse, that we'll discuss later on. What are dendrites? Dendrites are the branches of again cell body, and they are reached to the finest part of the body. I want you to be focused on this cell body part. The first branch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the seventh is axon, right? So these small 6 branches, they are known as dendrons. These small 7 branches are known as what? Dendrons. 6 branches, sorry. And there, every dendron has divided into many sub branches, and those sub branches are called as student dendrites. Okay, now in diagram, if you see, these are the Nissls granules, which are contain certain chemicals required for the transmission of impulse. Correct? Cell body is also known as perikaryon, or it is also called as cyton. These are the simple basic terms which I want you to remember. These are given on page number 124, blue color box. Kindly tick mark it important and learn by heart. Stimulus, a sudden change of external or internal environment, it's called as stimulus. Response, change in an organism due to the stimulus, it's called as response. Impulse, it is defined as wave of electrical disturbance that sweeps over the nerve cell. Receptors, they are the specialized epithelial cells which on receiving the stimulus set up the waves of impulse towards the central nervous system. Correct? Effectors, these are either muscles or glands on receiving the impulse from brain or spinal cord, either contract or secrete the substances. All these terms are required for your section 1. A question may be asked, fill in the blanks, give, define or match the following. Now let's see how this impulse is transmitted across the neuron. Before going ahead, watch this GIF carefully. Look at the direction of arrow coming from cyton, moving across the axon and reaching to the nerve ending or axon endings. Student, the yellow color positive charge, they represent sodium ion which are present outside the axon, and this impulse travels along this axon in parts, in a small pieces. If you can observe carefully, only 4 sodium ions, they are coming inside, and as soon as they are coming inside, it is helping impulse to travel. Now let's discuss this phenomenon in detail. This entire process is called as sodium pump. Why sodium pump? Because sodium is coming inside the axon, or it is pumping inside and outside, helping impulse to carry from cyton to axon endings. Okay. Now please look at this diagram carefully. Here, if you see that axon is divided into 3 parts, that is 3 different rows, 3 different pink rows, one containing only green color box, then blue and green, then blue, green and again pink color box. Okay, we will correlate this with earlier our GIF image and the discussion. Okay, now always remember that when the sodium ions are present outside the axon, the state is called as polarized state. Fine. Come to the first pink color row. If you see the negative pink color part, the negative ions, they are present inside. So the area which is shown in pink color is called as polarized state because there is no impulse, right? Now as soon as the impulse starts moving from cyton, it enter into the first part or the first myelin sheath of axon. So that much part will get depolarized. Can you see this green color box in first row only? Here the sodium ion has entered inside. Correct? On stimulation, sodium ion enters inside. So this much part of the neuron will get depolarized or excited. You can simply say this is one myelin sheath or between node of Ranvier, correct? Moving ahead, this depolarized part will serve as a stimulus for the neighboring area, correct? Now look at the second row. You will see that green color boxes slightly move ahead, and once this green color box move ahead, what will happen in earlier part? Look at the blue color box. They are again negatively charged ion come in, positively charged sodium ion went outside. So this will cause repolarization, correct? So if I want to summarize this nerve impulse, the first, the axon is always in polarized state. On receiving stimulus, it will become depolarized, and once the impulse moves forward, it will become repolarized. Now the last row of this axon, again the impulse has moved further, so the positively charged ion enters into that part, become depolarized. Earlier depolarized part become repolarized, and the earlier repolarized part has become polarized or resting part. See, I will request you to stop this presentation, pause this presentation, go through your textbook, and again come back to this presentation, revise it, repeat it. If you still have any doubt, feel free to call me. Now we will discuss two important concepts. Number one is synaptic cleft. What is the synaptic cleft? It is the space present between the neurons at a nerve synapse across which the nerve impulse is transmitted by neurotransmitter. Look at this diagram. Can you see the end of the neuron coming from upside, and it is a dendron of another neuron which is going to the downward side. The neuron ending coming from upward side is called as postsynaptic cell, and the neuron which will receive this synapse, which will receive this impulse, called as postsynaptic cell. So this minor gap, actually it is in nanometer size, is called as synaptic cleft. Okay, so this gap is always present between two neurons, and on receiving the impulse from the cell body, can you see this synaptic vesicles in presynaptic cell? These synaptic vesicle will burst, and once they burst, this blue color dot like structures called as neurotransmitter is released, and this neurotransmitter will come out from this green color doors. Can you see these green color doors called as calcium channels? Not in our syllabus, but through this channel this neurotransmitter come and they will fill this gap, and once this gap get filled, we called it as synapse. What is it? It is a point of contact between the branches of axon of a neuron, the dendrites of another neuron, separated by a fine gap. And what we had called this fine gap? Synaptic cleft. Okay, you can note down this later on. Look at this picture. Now here the color of the synaptic vesicle and the neurotransmitter had changed. Neurotransmitter is this brown color structure. Now they are filling the gap, and once this gap get filled, the nerve impulse from the neuron will be transmitted from this synaptic bulb to another neuron. Okay, from presynaptic neuron to postsynaptic neuron, right? Student, this synaptic cleft need to be filled with neurotransmitter, and the example of neurotransmitter which is given in our syllabus is called as acetylcholine. Okay, this acetylcholine word is mentioned on page number 125, right? Now, an interesting fact, if this synaptic cleft is not filled with the neurotransmitter, if it is filled with alcohol, it will not allow the impulse to travel from one neuron to another neuron. That's why a person who has consumed alcohol will lose its balance and do not walk properly. We'll move ahead. Types of neuron on structural basis, means how does they look like. Not in our syllabus, but I want you to note it down. There are three types of neuron: multipolar neuron, bipolar neuron, and unipolar neuron. I'll go very slow. You can pause this presentation in between and note down the definition. Number one is multipolar neuron. What is the meaning of the word multipolar neuron? If the cell body having more number of dendrites along with the axon, it's called as multipolar neuron. Right? Now if you see in the first picture, cell body is loaded with the new dendrites along with one long axon. Come to the bipolar neuron. Cell body is divided into two parts. That is only two branches. Correct? One single dendron and then another is axon. We are not interested that dendron is giving number of branches. But how many branches are arising from cell body? Only two. One major dendron and one is axon. Okay? So therefore we call such neuron as bipolar neuron. Come to the last picture, that is unipolar neuron. The meaning of the word unipolar neuron: the cell body will not show presence of any dendron or dendrite. It has only one single branch called as axon. Therefore it is called as one polar branch. Correct? So it is having only one branch. Correct? Now just note it down, their definitions. And one more point, that 99% of our body is having multipolar neuron. That's why we can respond to the situation or to the stimulus in a quicker manner. Move on to the next point. Types of neuron based on their function. This you have done in your 8th standard. Sensory neuron, motor neuron, association neuron, and its definition. Sensory neuron convey the impulse from receptor to the brain or spinal cord. Motor neuron carry the impulse from brain or spinal cord to the effector organs. Association neuron, they are located in the brain or spinal cord, which interconnect the sensory and motor neuron. Now this is all about the neurons. What is nerve? Nerve is a bundle of nerve fibers, basically axons, of separated neurons enclosed in a tubular sheath. Okay. Now you can correlate this with the electric wire. Okay. Now most of the electronic appliances, they are having three different of wires. Example, iron, if you take, so they are having three wires inside covered with a black color covering. One is live, another is neutral, and the third one is negative. Okay. So like this, if you collect the sensory axons of sensory neuron, we call that nerve as sensory nerve. Okay. If you collect the axons of motor neuron and bundle them together, we call it as motor nerves. And if you take the axons of some sensory neuron and some motor neuron, we call them as mixed nerve. Okay, so this is about the bundling of axon. Now if you bundle the cyton or cell body part of the neuron, we called it as ganglia. Green color box in front of you. So what is ganglia? They are the aggregates of nerve cell from which the nerve fiber arises. From where the nerve fibers are arising, student? They are arising from cyton. So therefore ganglia is the collection or bunch of cyton. Okay. Not so important ganglia, but nerve, yes, definitely. We'll move ahead. We'll go ahead now. Nervous system is divided into two parts, that is two division, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system includes brain and spinal cord, while peripheral nervous system includes somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. We'll start first with the central nervous system. As it consists of brain, it is well protected inside the brain box. We called it as cranium of the skull, and it weighs around 1.35 kg or simply 2% of the total body weight, it is covered with three different coverings. The biological term for these coverings are meninges. The outermost covering or outermost meninge is called as dura mater. The middle is called as arachnoid matter, and the innermost matter is called as pia mater. You can see it from the picture that outermost is dura, middle is arachnoid, and third is pia mater. And above all these meninges we are having skull, right? Now there is a fluid present between this space, and this fluid is called as CSF, stand for cerebrospinal fluid. This fluid, it will act like a shock absorber and also provide nourishment to the brain along with oxygen. A swelling to either of these meninges is called as meningitis. Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll discuss the different parts of the brain. Number 1 is cerebrum. Okay, number 2 is cerebellum. Number 3, medulla oblongata. So we will basically discuss about these three parts in detail, and we will have an introduction kind of explanation of thalamus, hypothalamus, midbrain and pons. Okay, number 1 is cerebrum. It is the largest portion of our brain, and it is divided into two parts called as cerebral hemisphere, right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemisphere. Each hemisphere is hollow internally, and the walls have two regions. Outer part is called as cortex, while inner part is called as medulla. Now we will alter these terms. The outer part is called as cerebral cortex, and the inner part is called as cerebral medulla. So please note down this word, cerebral cortex and cerebral medulla. Okay, the outer portion, that is cerebral cortex of cerebrum, contains cell bodies of the neurons, and therefore it appear grayish in color, and we called it as gray matter. Okay, next, this gray matter is having number of folds and grooves. Correct? The folds are called as gyri and the grooves are called as sulci. Correct? And since from studies it has been proved that the number of gyri and number of sulci will determine the intelligence. Higher the number, greater the intelligence. Okay? The inner portion of the cerebrum consists of white matter, which contains the axons of neurons, and both these two cerebral hemisphere students, they are connected by corpus callosum. Okay, and how does this corpus callosum look? Now in this diagram, can you see the part which is highlighted with the red color box? Corpus callosum. So it's a sheet of fibers which will connect these two cerebral hemisphere, and its function is the transfer of information from one hemisphere to other. And if anybody asks you what is the location of corpus callosum, you can say it is located at the base of cerebral hemisphere. Okay, now let's go to the next point, that is functions of cerebrum. To explain this in detail, I want you to note down these lobes of cerebrum: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe and temporal lobe. Okay, what is frontal lobe? The front part of our brain, and its functions are basically it will control your skeletal muscle, helps in decision making and planning. Parietal lobe mostly associated with our memory, therefore it will integrate all the sensory information and develop the sense of touch. Occipital lobe basically help us in visual association and also helps in processing all the visual stimulus and record the images. Temporal lobe will help you in hearing basically. These are the major functions, students, you have to remember for cerebrum, or simply we can summarize them That cerebrum is a seat of intelligence, consciousness and willpower, and it controls all voluntary actions. Right? We'll go to the next point. Second part of the brain is cerebellum. It is located at the base of cerebrum. It somewhat look like the leaf-like structure. It has number of furrows. They do not have any kind of sulci or gyri, and the main function is maintain the body balance by coordinating muscular activity. Okay. Third part is medulla oblongata. It is the lowest most portion of our brain. It is pyramid-like structure, and the main function is to control the activities of internal organs, integrate the signal between brain and the spinal cord, and controls involuntary activities like salivation, peristalsis, breathing and heartbeat. So therefore, student, any sudden injury or damage to the medulla oblongata cause death, as it contains two important vital functions or vital involuntary activities, that is breathing and heartbeat. Correct? For the proper understanding of the brain, we had divided the brain into three primary regions. Number one is forebrain. It includes cerebrum, diencephalon. Okay. Now this cerebrum is the seat of intelligence, memory, consciousness, willpower and voluntary actions. We already discussed. Diencephalon consists of thalamus. Can you see a thalamus in this diagram? Great. This thalamus, it is a relay center for pain and pressure to the cerebrum. What does this mean? All impulses regarding with the internal or external pain or pressure, it will come to the thalamus. Thalamus will analyze and amplify those impulses to the brain or cerebrum. Second, hypothalamus. This word you had studied in two different lessons. Number one is an endocrine gland in 10th standard, and in 9th standard skin lesson. Okay. Hypothalamus, it controls the body temperature, skin lesson, and as well as it controls the pituitary gland. Can you see the pituitary gland in the diagram also? That's why the location of pituitary gland is supposed to be below the hypothalamus at the base of midbrain. See, this is the part of what? Midbrain. Okay. Next is midbrain. Midbrain, it controls the reflexes involving eye and ear. Hindbrain, it contains cerebellum, pons and medulla oblongata. Cerebellum, as you know, it coordinates the muscular activity and body balance. Pons, it is located at the center of the, it is located at the center below the cerebellum, and it helps in developing the connection or transfer of impulses between right cerebellar hemisphere and left cerebellar hemisphere. Medulla oblongata, as you know, it controls the activity of internal organs.